Our last presenter today is longtime LINBIT developer Robert, and among many development roles here at LINBIT, Robert is the lead developer of the open source utility DRBDmon. And for those of you who don't know, DRBDmon is part of the DRBD's utils package or GitHub repository, depending on whether you're a LINBIT customer or a community user. DRBDmon can be a very useful and powerful tool to manage DRBD resources, and especially when you have many DRBD resources. Here you can think of many as being a number in the hundreds, possibly. DRBDmon might be one of the lesser known tools that LINBIT develops, and Robert is here to change that and convert you all into users. With that, Robert, please take it away.
Thanks. Let's get right into it. What I would like to show you today is how to use this utility effectively. And it was originally only a monitoring utility that we developed for our internal use. And then once we didn't really have anything else, so users also used it. So at some point in time, I think 2 years ago, we decided to change the user interface and also to enable this utility to also manage DRBDs or change the state, not just look at it. So first of all, how to start it? Obviously, DRBDmon, that's also the name of the binary that you have to type. It's part of the DRBD utils package that also contains DRBDadm, DRBD setup, and all those utilities. So I have 2 nodes here, actually 4-node cluster. I have 2 pulled up here to look at. And I'll split this presentation into parts. First of all, just basic usage. If you hardly ever use it, if you only have a few resources, then what are the most basic things that you can do with this thing? And then we will move on to some advanced usage where, especially if you have lots of resources, how can you effectively and efficiently use this utility? So once you're in here, first of all, what do you see here? Obviously the version, not really interesting. The next one is the node name. That can be interesting if you have like 5 of them open using SSH to different servers so that you can see what node you're looking at, because it only shows DRBD resources on each node. It does not show any remote resources. It doesn't show the entire cluster like Linstore would. It deals with the local node and the state of the resources on the local node. Then below that, depending on which display you are on, there are different displays for lists of resources, lists of volumes in those resources, lists of connections and stuff like that. It'll typically in list displays show you a header line that describes what the columns are, and then a list of all the items. In this case, if you start DRBDmon from the command line, you always end up on the resource list because that's the most interesting thing in DRBD. So from left to right, what you see here is there's a little bit of space to the left that shows you selection markers and alerts, alert symbols. And then this dot here means secondary mode. So the first column with the R is the role. That is hollowed. It's a hollow circle for secondary. It's a filled circle for primary. I'll show you that a little bit later. Then to the right of it is the resource name. So the name of your DRBD resource. And then the next column is volumes. That is split into 2 parts, just as connections. And then finally quorum. In the volumes and the connections columns, what you see is on the right side of those 2 fields is the total number of volumes and total number of connections for that resource. And on the left part is the number of volumes or connections respectively that are in a good state. So for example, here, obviously all of those green resources. Green means no problems, no errors. 1 volume, and it's also working. 3 connections, all 3 of them are working. If you look down here, this is a resource that experiences some kind of problem. And as you can see, it has 1 volume, it has 3 connections, but that one volume isn't working correctly, and only one of the 3 connections is working as it should. Last column is quorum. This one doesn't have quorum. That's why it says no. The other ones say yes. And it's pretty obvious. Red means there's some kind of problem. Green means everything is okay. And if you look on the second or third page, you'll probably see some that have a yellow marker here. So there are 2 different kinds of markers. Red ones mean an alert, and alert normally means locally on this node something is wrong. So either the connection is not connected or the volume is not okay, something like that. Warnings are the yellow hollow triangles, and that normally means something on a remote node is not okay, and it has limited views of that, so it doesn't see everything that remote nodes do. We can look into this one a little bit later, and you'll see that there's a problem with a remote volume in this case. The flags appear, first of all, left to the resource. If there's any kind of problem or warning, then the entire resource will be flagged. And then the details are to the right. If it appears in front of volumes, then there's a volume problem. In front of connections, obviously there's some kind of connection problem. The next most important thing to know on these displays is that you not only can you look at different pages and what the state is of all of those resources, but you can also navigate to resources and show details. And to do that, you have to press the tab key. So tab enables a cursor that you can navigate with the arrow keys. If you press tab again, then the cursor disappears and you're back in page mode. So once you have the cursor, you can navigate to whichever resource you want to take a look at, for example, this one. And then if you press enter, you will see details describing what the problems with this resource are, or if there are no problems, obviously just what the state is. So in that case, it says, for example, status degraded because it's not working properly. And connections says there are 3 connections. 1 is normal, 2 are degraded, and 1 volume is there, but it's also degraded and it doesn't have quorum. So the interesting things here would be, first of all, the connections, because they're degraded, and you can navigate there with those hotkeys A, B, A, C, and V. C for connections, that puts you on the connections list for that resource. And again, same thing, you can press the tab key and you get a cursor to navigate, and you can navigate to the connection status. Enter again and you get connection details. It's exactly the same for volumes. So that is how you'll navigate. That is basic navigation in DRBDmon. To get back, F10 closes the display. So it basically puts you back on the previous display that you were on. And there's actually one display on top of the resource list. If you press F10 again, it puts you on the main menu display, where you can navigate to basically everything else. So you would want to go back to the resource overview, which is this resource list. You can do the same things using the mouse if the terminal supports mouse reporting and if it's turned on in DRBDmon, which is the default. So unless you turn it off, it's turned on. So you can just click on things, mark some resource, and if you press the right mouse button, which does not work on all terminals, or just be warned, some of them intercept that and use it for their own context menu. In that case, you'll just have to press enter on the keyboard. But if the terminal supports it and you click with the right mouse button, that does the same thing as the enter key. And you can also click those hotkeys, volumes, details for this volume, and things like that. In general, for everyone who's using DRBD, no matter what utility you are using, DRBD-ADM, DRBD setup, DRBDmon, doesn't really matter, even LinStore, how do you solve problems in DRBD? There is basically a cycle that works for solving any kind of problem. It's also true for DRBD, and that is, first of all, you need to get an overview of what's going on. Just look at what the state is. And there is a neat utility here in DRBDmon to get an overview of what all the problems are. That is pressing the P key, P as in problems. That's a tri-state switch. So if you press P once, it goes into problems auto, shown up here. And it limits the view to only show resources, volumes, and connections that have some kind of problem. Volume is not attached, connection is not connected, something like that. So everything that you see now is some reasons that needs something done to it to make it work normally. And then if you press P again, you can lock that to problems, meaning that even if no resources have problems, it will not show anything. We'll just say there are no resources with problems. In problems auto mode, if there are no resources with problems, it goes back to the normal resource list where it shows everything. Now that we have an overview, and you probably want the same overview on a different node so that you can compare what the problem is on each node. For example, this resource is the same on those two nodes. Now I can see I have a volume problem on this node, and on the other node, it says there's a connection problem. So I would probably want to look at the volumes first. The next thing is to figure out why the problem exists. So figure out what the situation is, what caused the situation. Are all the volumes that are detached in the same storage pool? Then you probably have a problem with the storage pool. Are all of the resources disconnected from the same node? You probably have that node down, most probably, or maybe it has a network problem. So try to make sense of what you're seeing. Then the next step would be to decide what you want to do with all those problems. So do you want to adjust? Do you maybe want to restart the node before you do anything? Decide what to do. And then finally, you carry out those actions, and then you start over again, because just because you issue some command doesn't mean that everything is better now. You have to figure out what happened after you did that. So in this case, for example, this volume says up to date. It seems to work locally. There's some reason why it says the volume is not okay. Let's look at the resources, the connections. So all of those three, for example, say they're in standalone. Standalone meaning it's not trying to connect to the other node. And I can compare on this other node what this node is doing on the same resource, connections. It says it's trying to connect on this node, so that seems okay. Kratos, 8 tracks. 8 tracks is not trying to connect to Kratos, but Kratos is trying to connect to 8 tracks. So the only thing I need to do, most probably, is to call up an action here. There are two ways to do that. Either you navigate to the details and go to the actions, and then you select connect, or you can do it a little bit quicker and go directly from this resource line by pressing the A key for actions. Go directly to actions and select connect, number 1. And then obviously that worked. So it disappears from the problems display, and you can do the same thing for the other ones. Again, you can do it with the mouse if that is faster. And the final one, actions, connect. And this resource looks a lot better now. Also says problems in blue now on this connection list, because all of the connections are good. That's problems auto mode, as I said, problems lock. It would just say no problems. So that's the most basic usage of DRBDmon, is just looking at what's going on, one resource at a time. This one, for example, connection list. So this is the connection with the problem. It's also on this node, Kratos connected. It says the volume on Kratos has some kind of problem. There's one more view here that is peer volumes, and it says negotiating here. So if we go here on Kratos and look for the same resource, CF something that's over here somewhere, the last one. And I will also show you a function to find that a little bit faster. Then if you go to volumes here, then you will see that this one also says negotiating. And In that case, that's not even a bug that I introduced for today's training. That happened by accident. So this is a real life demonstration how to solve this. You probably want to disconnect and reconnect this resource on one of the nodes, probably here. So go to the resource, disconnect all of the replication links, and then reconnect them. And then it should go back to established, which is exactly what happened. And it disappeared from the problems view. Now for the advanced users, there is a possibility to do all of that a little bit faster, especially if you have problems enabled. There are selection commands where you can do select all. And if you're showing only problematic resources and you select all, it doesn't select all of the resources. It actually selects those that you can see. So even if you go back to the list of all resources, only the ones with problems are selected, and now you can run actions on multiple resources. Important thing here, you have to go to the actions page directly from the selection and not from a details page, because details pages are for a single resource and actions called from here are for that single resource. So you have to be on a list view to carry out actions on multiple items. So directly press A for actions, and then normally if something went wrong, the first thing you would want to try is adjust resource, because that just tells DRBDmon to try and bring all those resources back to a normal working state. So if you do that, most of the problems are gone immediately. And then you can press F4 to cancel a selection. There are some problems remaining here. Same here, you can go back to problems if you want, and then figure out what the remaining problems are. Maybe they're on this node. Again, for selecting, you can also, if I go back to this view, you can also select using the mouse by clicking very far to the left on the resource line, and you will see those selection markers, and then carry out actions on these resources. And now all problems are resolved. You see problems auto goes blue instead of red, and it says no degraded resources. So advanced usage in DRBDmon is selecting resources basically and doing many things at once. What's new in this new version that you will get with one of the next DRBD utils updates is that you can select resources using patterns. So for example, if you want all of those data resources, you can do select asterisk data, and it marks all of the data resources, and you can run a command on those. For example, stop all of those. It's one possibility. If I go back to the normal resource list, then all of those disappear. Another important thing is selection and cursor remains active even if you can't see the item that is selected. Same for the cursor. If I stop this resource, then it still says cursor up here, even though you can't see it. But if you press enter, you will see that this resource is still selected. Unless you move the cursor, it stays selected. So you can, for example, restart it. And that's advanced usage here. There's also a command to place the cursor on a resource if you want to find something quickly. For example, if I see something here, 0828D8, and I don't know where this is on this machine, and I can just do cursor dash asterisk 0828D8, something that's unique, asterisk, and it moves exactly here. And there are a couple of commands for things like that. For example, you have a pacemaker error message that says def DRBD 1063 has a problem. Minor number 1063 is in this resource. The most important key in this whole thing is F1, if you ask me. Help, it says it right here. So wherever you are, if you press F1, you get a help text that explains what you can do, what the keys are, what the commands are that you can use. If you press F1 again, down here it says help index. Then you get the index of all help topics. You just need to read the help on whatever you want to know, and you can figure out how stuff works and what all the commands are. There are pretty powerful commands in here. You can use the command line and type things in. I think it doesn't make too much sense for me to get even more into details here, because this thing has a lot of functions and features and details that you can do, and most of them are in the help text. Otherwise, we also have a forum where you can ask questions, and the Slack channel is still active, will be replaced by the forum. So if you have specific questions on how to do things with DRBDmon, then it's probably best to ask in the forum, and we will answer them what the best method is to do that. Otherwise, I have one final thing with regards to terminals, because some terminals like to act up and some operating systems block certain function keys. If something with your terminal doesn't work, you can use commands instead of, for example, instead of function 10, there's a close command to close the display. You can go to displays using the display command. You can go to the help and things like that, just in case that your command, your function keys don't work. Go to the main menu and things like that. So there's normally more than one way to do things in DRBDmon, and if one doesn't work, then the other one does. That's all for now. In one of the next sessions, I think we'll go into how to configure this utility, because you can reconfigure certain things and save that in a configuration file. And you can do that from the command line and distribute it to different nodes and stuff like that. But I will leave that out for today. And if there are any immediate questions, then you can ask them right now and I'll try to answer that. Otherwise, as I said, the forums. And thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Robert. A question did come in from a YouTube viewer, but I think you answered it during the later part of your presentation. Can DRBDmon handle bulk actions, for example, downing or invalidating and resyncing multiple resources at once?
Yep. So to go into a little bit more detail, some of them. So you can run bulk actions on resources, bulk actions on the volumes of a single resource, if there are multiple volumes, bulk actions on connections, and limited bulk actions on connections. So you can select 10 resources and disconnect all of the connections of all of those 10 resources. What it doesn't do is something like detach the second volume of each resource. That's something that it doesn't do because it doesn't make a lot of sense. Same thing for connections. That might actually make sense. We might add that in the future, where you can say, for all the resources, disconnect this single node. That might make sense. That's probably a feasible feature for the future. Right now, it doesn't do that. You can do bulk actions on multiple connections of a single resource. That's possible. And also bulk actions for large setups, you can run at most 1024 actions at a time. So at most 1024 actions, more or less. For example, 1024 stop commands can be queued. That is compiled in if you have very large setups and you frequently need to run more than, I don't know, 2000 actions at a time, and you don't want to split them up, then you might want to use a custom build of DRBDmon. It's very easy to change. We just rebuild it for you, 5 minutes, and you can run 4000 if you want.